Hi, rock and blues fans. So this week I'm speaking to the famous Chicago-based slide guitar queen. She's an accomplished singer-songwriter and her name is Joanna Connor. And she shared stages with James Cotton and Junior Wells and Buddy Guy and AC Reed and everybody through a very honourable and very long career. But the reason that we're interested in her now is because she's about to release her 14th album, and it's titled The Address of Teresa's Lounge, a famous blues lounge in Chicago. And her new album, her 14th album, is released on Joe Bonamassa's new independent blues record label named the Keeping the Blues Alive. And in fact, Bonamassa himself has produced the album. So I wanted to talk to Joanna about her life in music, what it's like to play the blues as a woman in Chicago, and what it was like working with Bonamassa on the new album. And I started by asking her about her route into music. And it's interesting because she started in Massachusetts and she started with jazz and she started on the saxophone. So here's how the interview went.
No, I actually played sax. I was 20. I gave up that, but I gave up guitar when I was 9, and I picked it back again when I was 14. But I played saxophone all that time. Yeah.
And you grew up in Worcester. Well, we say Worcester. Do you say Worcester or Worcester in Massachusetts?
We say Worcester.
Oh, right. That's good.
Yeah.
Do you remember ever seeing your first concert, your first live gig?
You know, I know my mom took me to several things, and it was some kind of, oh gosh, I don't know, some kind of like acid rock band. And I don't remember the name of them, but it was like at an art museum. And it was like, I just remember it was like a woman singing, and it was like psychedelic rock, because this is probably like 1969 or something. So, but I don't know who it was. And the first really important show that I really remember was seeing Buddy Guy when I was like 10 years old.
So did your mum take you to see that Buddy?
She worked at Clark University, and that's where we saw a lot of concerts.
Right, yeah. So that's quite interesting because obviously later you sort of met Buddy and played along with him, didn't you? But that was after you went to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So what prompted the move to Chicago then?
I always loved the Chicago bands. I mean, they toured a lot through Massachusetts because it was such a college town, you know, all those college towns. So, you know, seeing James Cotton dozens of times and Albert Collins, you know, Sun Seals, Buddy Guy and Junior Wells, all those guys. I just love that Chicago sound. And well, we went to Chicago when I was 19 on like a trip across America. We stopped there, and we actually went there on the way to California and then went there on the way back because we loved it so much. And I said, you know, I have to live here. It was so much incredible music. And that's what I decided to move there a few years later.
So did you have a job to go to, or was it just,
No job. I have a distant cousin who set me up with an apartment. And I had saved up a little money at my job that I worked at. And I did get a job within a week working, because I used to work in restaurants in the kitchen. But within 5 weeks, I had a gig. So I started to play. And then as soon as I got enough gigs, I was like, no more working for me. So I quit.
Where was that first gig? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was at Blues on Halsted Street in Chicago.
So was that around about the same time that you kind of created your own band, or were you working for other bands at that stage?
I was working for other bands the first 3 years because I had my own band back home, but I was more of and my whole goal was I wanted to go to Chicago and really become a guitar player. And my goal was to find a band with like somebody that I really liked and try to get in their band and play guitar. And I didn't even want to sing really. And that's what happened. My first job I had was with Johnny Littlejohn. And he was a very traditional guy from Mississippi. Great experience. And then I played with a guy named Max Simmons, who was a harmonica player, Southern Soul. And then I was in a gospel group for a while, an all-female gospel group. it was an interesting road. And then finally I got into a band with Dion Payton, because he used to play with Lonnie Brooks and also had his own band called the 43rd Street Blues Band. And I loved his playing. And I used to like follow him everywhere. And I think I was a pest. And eventually one day he's like, so I used to sit in with him when he played with Lonnie Brooks. And one day he came up to me, this is like January, and I had come in October. He's like, I'm starting my own band. I'm leaving Lonnie. Would you like a job with playing with me? And I was like, and that was my whole goal. So yeah, I remember saying, I'll play for free, like an idiot. But anyway, so that's how that started. And then, you know, we were the house band at the Checkerboard Lounge, which is owned by Buddy Guy, every Friday and Saturday. And then we were the house band at Kingston Mines every Thursday. And that's where I got to, and we used to back up all the different people in Chicago. So that's what I call my blues university, you know.
So was that when you sort of met up and played with Junior Wells and those sort of people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
So tell us about your guitar work then, because I read that you didn't really play lead solo until a little bit later in your career. And on the whole, you wanted to be a really good rhythm guitarist. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think I was a really good rhythm guitar player, and I enjoyed it. And I did that for years. Like, you know, I couldn't figure out how to play lead guitar. And that was one of the things I wanted to do when I came to Chicago. And literally within a few months, it started to click, you know, because I went out every night. I'd go to jam. I was playing in bands. And so I really started soloing once I moved to Chicago. And that's what got the attention, was like, here's a young woman guitar player that's soloing and whatever. So when I hit 22, it kind of just gelled and fell into place, you know.
Rhythm is still important to you, because I've been listening to obviously the new album, and it is very rhythmic. There's a whole load of riffs, basically. Someone told me once, a guitarist in this country, that blues is basically just repeating. It's just repeating phrases over and over again. But you couldn't get much more repetitive, really, than a riff.
Yes.
Do you feel the same way?
I do. I mean, I think people underestimate rhythm guitar, but if you look at every song the Rolling Stones ever wrote, it was based on Keith Richards' guitar licks. And you can even a non-musician will know, like, you know, oh, that's Honky Tonk Woman. Oh, that's Brown Sugar. Oh, that's Can't Get No Satisfaction. And the same with Led Zeppelin. I mean, so all the good, you know, rock bands especially back at that time that were blues based, was based on guitarists, and how wonderful, you know. I mean, genius, absolute genius stuff.
Have you seen the Rolling Stones play? Had you seen them by then?
No, I have never had the chance to see them. Mick Jagger in Chicago.
You met him?
I did, yeah.
Come to one of your shows? He
was actually, this is way back in the 80s, kind of when he was doing a solo career. And he was actually in Chicago looking at guitar players to, not at me. He was actually looking at Dion Payton, who I played with, so that's how I got to meet him. I was like, Mick Jagger, and he's like, hi, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. Very polite, right? A little standoffish, but understandable. But no, I never got to see the Stones. I never got to see Led Zeppelin either.
I just wanted to ask you about 4801 South Indiana Avenue, because that is the a famous club, isn't it? Did you ever play that club?
I did. Teresa's Lounge, I played there.
Yeah.
And that was also, I forgot to mention, that was one of the first gigs I ever played before I was with Dion. Yeah, it was a guy named Phil Loman. I don't even know how I got the job with him, but he was a Chicago sheriff who also was a part-time musician. And it was like a Friday and Saturday night at Teresa's, and he hired me to play guitar for him.
So you went down to Nashville to record this album, which is named that. Do you know why you had to go to Nashville? The reason I'm asking that is because you come from New York, so does Joe. Why not record it in New York, or why not record it in Chicago? I'm still not clear why you had to go to Nashville.
You know what? I think half of the band that we used lived in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. And Ocean Way Studios, I guess, it's one of the most famous studios in the country. Yeah. So I'm sure that was a factor. And Joe also, he has a house, like a townhouse in Nashville too. So he lives there, well, you know, part-time. So I think that was all the factors.
So what was Joe like as a producer then? So tell me about your experience as as Joe being your producer.
I didn't know what to expect, obviously, because I'd never worked with him. He was a fantastic producer, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, he was very inspiring. He knew how to communicate with the musicians. He was technically like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. Yeah, he put on the XR50 side. And for the vocals, what was really great was that he could, like, if he had an idea for me, he could sing it to me. And there's a lot of producers, they're not necessarily even musicians, you know, never mind. So that was really, really helpful. Really helpful with the vocal. And he's a really good singer. So I was like, oh, okay. Because with other producers, they try to describe, well, can you try this kind of like that? And you're like kind of figuring it out. And he could sing it, I would sing it back, you know. So that was a bonus. But I loved working with him. I mean, he was funny. He's got a really dry sense of humor and very encouraging. He said he was a dictator, but I didn't feel that way. I think he's being a little sarcastic, but he told us from the beginning, he told all of us, he's like, listen, if we don't get these songs in 2 or 3 takes, we're moving on. I want energy. I want it to be fresh. I don't want it to be just, you know, he wanted to capture that live, energetic feeling, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's certainly what you've achieved. Did you go out of your way to use authentic instruments or certain sort of amplification, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the amp was for sure. He had me try a few amps up in his place in Nashville because, of course, everywhere he lives, he's got tons of gear. So he had me plug into a bunch of amps and with different guitars, and then we decided to use this. I think it was a 1955 Fender Deluxe. You know, that's all that I used in the studio. But I used my Les Paul, and he threw a couple other guitars in my hand, but yeah, we kept it pretty simple.
Did he do any sort of slide work with you? Sort of bottleneck?
He did.
How do you find him? What did you? How would you put? What mark would you give him?
Oh, an A. He said he's a terrible slide player. I'm like, are you kidding me? He's a great slide player. I was like, because it was funny because he played rhythm on the whole album, and at one point we were taking a break, and I'm like, could you play some lead on here too? You know, would you like to? He goes, do you want me to? I'm like, yeah, I think I want Joe Bonamassa to play a solo on my record. And he ended up doing this slide duet thing with me, which is really cool, you know.
Which track is that?
I hope you have it. Called It's My Time.
He did open for you. That's what I read at the House of Blues in Chicago. Is that right?
He did. Well, he remembered. I knew it was a long time. He goes, yeah, it was 2002. Okay, that sounds about right. So I played at the House of Blues from like 2000 until recently. I had that gig for almost 20 years, every week, you know, usually every Monday. And so yeah, the guy that booked the House of Blues, like I think you saw in the interview, he said, oh, there's this young guitar player. Is it okay if he opens up for you? And he didn't say who he was. I don't care. Sure, you know. Then it was Joe Bonamassa. And I had known about him because if you're a guitar player, even when he was a kid, he would be written up in magazines. But I wasn't so familiar with him. I mean, he wasn't like what he is now, you know.
So what was it like then to work with him on every single track? And like, how does he compare, do you think, with Jimmy Page and Buddy Guy?
Oh boy. That's a tough question. I will say this. Joe Bonamassa is probably one of the most complete guitar players I've ever heard. He can play any style, whether on acoustic or electric. He just kills it, you know. He's very fluent in a lot of styles, and his technical ability on the guitar in terms of his touch of his left hand and right hand. I mean, he could pick up any guitar and it sounds even not plugged in, because I had the privilege to sit there and listen to him playing a million guitars, not even amplified, and his tone and his attack is perfect, like literally perfect. I mean, technically one of the best guitar players ever, in my opinion. You know, and he's not a one-trick pony. He's not just like a guy, you know, that just shreds. I mean, he plays everything. It could be jazz, it could be blues, it could be country, it could be swing, it could be rock, it could be fusion, and he just nails it, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he has feeling for sure. You know, there's a lot of great technical players, but the best player, in my opinion, has both. The best player has the technical ability and the soul. And when you get that, that's when you get phenomenal musicians, the most important musicians. And I mean, in some of the, you know, early blues players, yeah, they were more raw. They weren't so technical, but, you know, even a lot of them, if you listen to some of the things that they did, it was pretty genius. I mean, Robert Johnson, and, you know, they were doing things that's what people said, oh, he sold his soul to the devil. He was so advanced. So it's a different kind of playing, and guitar has evolved over time. And when you hear, like, you know, guitar solos, even from the early mid 60s, they sound pretty primitive. A guy like Hendrix comes along, and then, so, you know, it's like it builds on the whole vocabulary. Now you have guitar players doing things, you know, two-handed tapping like Stanley Jordan.
Yeah.
I mean, no one would have ever imagined. So it's a living, breathing thing, you know, and people just get better at it all the time.
So let's talk about some of the songs on the new album. The first thing I wanted to ask you is there any newly penned songs? You know, have you written any songs for this?
No. Yeah, Joe picked most of the material with my approval, but they try to find, him and Josh Smith try to find songs that you don't usually hear. B-sides or deep cuts or whatever. We didn't want to just do anything too obvious, you know, or that's been covered a million times. So little hidden gems. I don't know if he had any song he particularly wanted to get down, but I think he tried to choose material that, like I said, was hidden gems, and also that everything was different. So like each cut has its own, you know, nothing sounds like the next cut at all. I think each one has its individual statement, you know.
What about your own favorite? What's your favorite on the album?
I don't know. I like, there's not a weak, in my opinion, there's no weak cuts on there. You know, so it's not like I go, oh, I wish we didn't put this one on there, you know.
Yeah.
I like them. They're all very different. So it's hard for me to choose, like, it's like choosing your favorite kid if you have more than one, you know? I would say Bad News. I'd say that's the most emotional. Well, you know, I in the 90s, I had a German agent and manager named Thomas Roof, who later now has a record label. And actually I was one of the first people he recorded. So I opened up for Luther. He was Luther's manager. I opened up for Luther for like 9 years. Several times a year. So I probably did at least 60 to 70 shows with him. So I really got to know Luther. And he was just absolutely, you know, one of the greatest blues singers, guitar player, entertainers, songwriters. I mean, it just broke my heart that, you know, he was big in Europe, you know, in a lot of Europe. But in the States, he was just starting to finally get the recognition, and then he got sick and died. And it just seemed so unfair to me, you know. So for me to do a Luther Allison tune was kind of extra. It was kind of heavy in a way because I was connected to him. You know, I've met Albert King, you know, blah, 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 but I wasn't connected to Albert King. No connection. And it's such a heavy song. So it was quite the experience to cover that tune, you know.
And I suppose it must have felt somehow rawer because of the whole epidemic stuff we're going through now with people dying.
Well, you know what? This is the thing. That record was made in February of 2020. And so we didn't know anything about, this is the pre-pandemic. So, yeah, thank God, because that gave us, you know, we were free to do whatever. And a few weeks after we made the record, the whole world came crashing down, you know. At that point, it was some, you know, little story online that said, yeah, there was a virus in China, you know. I wasn't worried about it, you know.
We've talked a lot about male blues guitarists, but which female blues guitarists have influenced you? Or it don't have to be necessarily blues, it might be jazz or rock. perhaps contemporary or illustrious predecessors?
Well, I'm older than, there's a new crop of women players now. There's Samantha Fish, there's Joanne Shaw Taylor, there's Anna Popovic, Orianthi. There's like, but they're all younger than me. I'm like mom.
You're the queen. They're just princesses.
So they weren't around. So the only woman that I ever heard play guitar was Bonnie Raitt, and who I loved, but she wasn't exactly, she's a great slide player, great acoustic player, but her and I play very differently. So there was no real female role models. There was Memphis Minnie, Rory Block, but they were all more acoustic people. And there was like the Runaways, but when I was a kid, but I wasn't very into them. So there was plenty of women vocalists I loved. I loved Aretha Franklin, but in terms of guitar players, there really wasn't a role model for years. And then finally I met another one, which was Debbie Davies. She played with Albert Collins, and we crossed paths, I don't know, maybe 1990. So all the years I had come up playing, I didn't know of any female guitar players. So she was the first one. And then Deborah Coleman came along. She was like next in the blues field. And there was like, that's what made it kind of unique record, was because like, oh, there's a female guitarist, playing lead and playing electric and playing blues and playing slide. It was, it was different.
Was there any difficulties? Did you encounter any obvious sexism?
Of course. I love men very much, but there's a dark side. It's definitely a music still. It's becoming more open to women for sure. But when you're in music, the sound men were men, the agents are usually men, the club owners are usually men, the musicians. It's very, so it's turning around. But I always felt like when I was growing up, like all the things I like to do, which is like, I love sports, I love like climbing trees and bike riding. And I was kind of, I guess they call it a tomboy. And I was like, why do guys get to do all the fun stuff? Like, why? I like playing with dolls and whatever, but most of the things I really loved, or even music, I would sit in class talking to a bunch of guys about the latest rock record and, the latest rock album or the latest whatever. And I just made up my mind as a young girl, like, you know what? If I enjoy doing something, I don't care if it's, men do it. I want to do it. I just went for it, That's why I always loved hanging around with boys or guys, because we connected on so many things, the humor and whatever. But so then when I got to be a musician, traveling with men all the time, it wasn't uncomfortable to me. It wasn't like, oh, I'm a delicate flower, I wasn't. Yeah. I didn't have that kind of treatment, and it was like I was kind of like one of the guys,
I suppose you'll be looking forward to touring this album one day. Yeah. Although all plans are on hold, aren't they?
Yes, it was supposed to come out in June, and it was supposed to be a big splash and be on tour. And I had gigs in Europe, I had gigs in America, and this is the reality we face now, Just hoping that maybe it was great timing, you never know. And until later, you'll look back and go, oh, that was great timing. Build up steam and get my name out there, and then the touring will open up and maybe it'll all work out perfectly. That's what I'm hoping,
Is there any plan for some kind of online event then?
I think that's definitely going to happen. And I think that's going to probably be in March sometime, because the album comes out like one of the last days in February. I think Joe and I are going to brainstorm, and I would like to get him up to Chicago and have him play with my band, That's what you're the first person I've told. So I know right now he's in the studio making a record with Jimmy Hall, so I'm not going to bother him. I'm like, when they're done, I'm going to be like, hey, Joe, I have an idea here,
So have you got a regular show in Chicago right now? Obviously, if it was...
I did. I played 4 nights a week in Chicago. I had 3 nights a week at Kingston Mines, 1 night a week at House of Blues, and then like a couple nights a month at Buddy Guy's Legends and Rose's Lounge once every few months. So I had a lot at work, and then there was a few places in the suburbs. So I had a lot of work in Chicago, but only Rose's Lounge has been doing online stuff, but Buddy Guys hasn't opened since March. Kingston Mines hasn't opened. House of Blues hasn't opened. So I don't know I'm just hoping that the clubs survive. And so we don't even know. I mean, right now, I think this past weekend, the governor allowed 25% capacity in restaurants and clubs, but they have to be closed by 11. Yeah, it looks pretty dismal, but I'm trying to just hang in there and be hopeful.
Teresa's Lounge was gone by, I think, about 1983. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to play it?
Oh, yeah, I did. I think it was open. I'm not sure when it closed, but I did play there when I first got to Chicago. So it was 1984. So I played there twice. So I did actually play there a weekend, and then actually 3 times, a weekend and then once during the week. So I did play there, and it was very memorable.
Did you meet Teresa?
I did. Yes.
How much influence do you think she had on the history of the blues?
Oh, a lot. I mean, her club was around before the checkerboard. I mean, I had much more connection to the checkerboard, but I mean, Teresa spawned, I mean, Muddy Waters played there, Howlin' Wolf played there, Buddy Guy played there, Junior Wells had like a weekly jam there. I mean, the Myers brothers, I mean, it's like part of the blues history. And she was a tough lady. I mean, to be a club owner anyway, as a woman, as a Black woman on the south side of Chicago, dealing with all these guys. I mean, she was definitely a queen, to say the least, and she was tough. And, you know, I remember her, she was actually behind the bar, and I remember she had a shotgun back there, and I was like, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you again.
Bye.
Bye.